तो शिवानी जी, ईशा, भावेश, आंशा, अक्षय, पढ़ा केस को? श्वेता, थोड़ा सा और रिमाइंड भी करवा देना। अभी कुल 9 लोग हैं आप। मैं कोशिश करूंगा जब और बाकी लोग भी आ जाएं। जो आप लोगों को असाइनमेंट सबमिट करना है किसका? क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर का, है ना? उनमें एनी 2 आप सबमिट कर दीजिएगा इंस्टेड ऑफ 5, क्योंकि अभी एग्जाम क्लोज आ रहा है, तो आपका नेसेसरी वैसा टाइम वेस्ट ना हो। प्लस चूंकि अब ऑनलाइन एग्जाम होना है ना, डिस्क्रिप्टिव तो होना नहीं है, तो ऐसा उतना डिस्क्रिप्टिव का रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है। तो अदर रिक्वायरमेंट पर्पज से इंस्टेड ऑफ 5 और 6 क्वेश्चन, ओनली 2 क्वेश्चंस, एनी 2 जो भी हैं वो सबमिट कर देंगे, ठीक है? और ये सभी को बोल देंगे, वेलकम सत्यम, just keeping in mind your examination pattern, keeping in mind the time remaining, that's why I'm giving you this relaxation. Clear? बट प्रोजेक्ट वर्क के बारे में अभी बात करना बाकी है, जो हमने डे 1 पे डिस्कस किया हुआ था कि आप लोगों को 2 से 3 लोग ज्वाइन हो सकते हैं, एक ही मतलब एक ग्रुप क्रिएट कर सकते हैं। एंड 1 to 5 मॉड्यूल में हमने जो भी चीजें पढ़ी हैं, you just select a company. It's now completely on online basis. Select a company and just go through the websites or other literature and try to identify what are the systems and how they are managing their MIS. तो हमने जो पढ़ा है मॉड्यूल 1 से 5 तक, उस पर्टिकुलर कंपनी में क्या क्या अवेलेबल है, किस तरीके से वो मैनेज कर रहे हैं, जो पब्लिक डोमेन में इंफॉर्मेशन है उसके बेसिस पर, ठीक है? एक राइटअप प्रिपेयर कर देंगे, मैं उस राइटअप की डिटेल आपसे शेयर कर लूंगा। ऑब्जेक्टिव इसका यही है कि यू जस्ट नीड टू लुक इन अ पर्टिकुलर कंपनी in which you are familiar with and check how our things or a content which we have learned, how it is applied in a real life or in a particular known organization. Okay? 3 लोग करेंगे। यू यू मैक्सिमम यू रिक्वायर्ड 1 hours ज्वाइंटली। अगर तीनों 1 घंटा दे रहे हैं तो टोटल अवर्स तो 3 hours होंगे, बट मतलब लगेगा तो एक ही घंटा। इंडिविजुअल अवर्स 3 हो सकते हैं, 1 1 1 3, बट सम टोटल 1 hour में भी आप इस प्रोजेक्ट को कंप्लीट कर सकते हैं, ठीक है? कोई बहुत बड़ा काम नहीं होगा। यू जस्ट डिसाइड योर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एंड चेक on those pages or other media or other platforms wherever you are getting the information from the authentic genuine sources and put it in a meaningful manner. Module wise you can present it, that's only. So you will have a practical or real life learning how the things are used by the various organization. You can give it in a group manner. You can if you wish to finish it individually, I don't have any issue. Clear? Group only for your time saving, nothing else, no compulsion. मैं आज गूगल वो बना दूंगा एक फॉर्म, तो आप अपना या अपनी टीम का मेंबर्स के नेम वहाँ पे लिख दीजिएगा, किसी एक का कॉन्टेक्ट नंबर, और फिर उसके बाद आपका कंपनी का नेम, जो कि यूनिक होना चाहिए सीट में कि कौन कौन है, कौन सा कंपनी। रिपीट मत करिएगा क्योंकि उसमें फिर मज़ा नहीं आता है, ठीक है? तो जो पहले एंट्री करता जाए उस तरीके से उसमें वो चीज़ें फिट रहे आएंगी, ठीक है ना? तो मैं 2 चीजें बना दूंगा ताकि डुप्लीकेसी ना हो। 2 चीजें क्या रहेंगी? सिमिलर ही रहेंगी। एक एक्सेल सीट जैसा, तो आप लोगों को वो डिस्प्ले हो जाएगा कि बाकी ने क्या एंट्री की है। फिर बना दूंगा गूगल फॉर्म, तो आप एंट्री कर लीजिएगा। इससे क्या हो जाएगा, सेफ्टी की कोई डुप्लीकेसी करेगा अगर, तो मेरे पास रिकॉर्ड रहेगा कि फर्स्ट किसने एंट्री की है, ठीक है ना? गूगल फॉर्म के थ्रू बिट टाइम मेरे पास रहेगा कि फर्स्ट एंट्री कंपनी का नाम या ग्रुप का नाम ये था, तो उस फर्स्ट वाले को हम फिर प्रेफर करेंगे, क्योंकि गूगल सीट में क्या हो सकता है, कोई दूसरा भी एक प्रकार से राइटिंग राइट्स सभी के पास रहते हैं, तो कोई मिस्टेक अगर कर रहा है तो उसमें कोई ब्लेम या क्लेम नहीं कर पाएगा कि नहीं सर मैं तो ये किया था। तो फाइनल एंट्री किसको मानेंगे आपने, जो गूगल सीट पे चेक करने के बाद आपने एंट्री की है, ठीक है। शायद सभी को समझ में आ गया होगा इतना। रिक्वेस्ट ये रहेगा कि अभी आप जैसे 18 है तो बाकी मेंबर्स से इस चीज को कम्युनिकेट कर देंगे। अगर कोई एक भी बंदा रहता है तो मैं ये मानूंगा कि आपका ग्रुप या आपका ग्रुप परफॉर्मेंस पुअर कहलाया, क्योंकि 18 लोग अगर बाकी क्लास मेंबर्स को इतना कम्युनिकेट नहीं कर पाए तो मतलब 2 साल में आप लोगों का ग्रुप परफेक्ट उतना नहीं हुआ है, क्योंकि अभी है नहीं, ठीक है। तो मैं अपडेट तो कर दूंगा ग्रुप में भी, बट मैकेनिज्म मैंने बता दिया। एक सीट हो जाएगा आपको देखने के लिए, फॉर्म हो जाएगा फाइनल एंट्री के लिए। तो गूगल सीट में आप देख लेंगे कि कौन सी कंपनीज के नाम लिखे हैं, उसको छोड़ के कोई दूसरा कंपनी आप वहां लिखे। कोशिश करें मल्टीनेशनल इंटरनेशनल ऐसी कंपनी जो ऑनलाइन या डिजिटल प्लेटफॉर्म पे जिनकी बहुत सी डिटेल्स अवेलेबल हो, वो ज़्यादा बेहतर है, ठीक है। आप गवर्नमेंट्स को भी ले सकते हैं, आप वैक्सीनेशन प्रोग्राम्स की टोटल जो हेल्थ मिनिस्ट्री कोलैबोरेशन में कर रही है उसको भी देख सकते हैं, एनालिसिस कर सकते हैं कि क्या कैसे वो यूज़ कर रहे हैं, ठीक है। इलेक्शन कमीशन यूज करता है, बहुत सारी चीजें, जहां पे भी आपका दिमाग जाए आप उस जगह कर सकते हैं, कोई रिस्ट्रिक्शंस मेरे साइड से नहीं है। तो क्विकली पहले हम वीडियोस देखते हैं और उसके बाद फटाफट एनालिसिस पे चलते हैं। और वीडियो अगर आप बोलें कि सर जरूरत नहीं है तो मेरे लिए और खुशी रहेगी, क्योंकि कोई और दिक्कत ही नहीं है फिर तो मैं फर्स्ट वीडियो को फिर भी स्किप कर देता हूँ, ये एमी जगत वाला जो वीडियो है, क्योंकि ये शायद आपने देखा होगा, याद रहा होगा।
On November 24th, 2014, it was the Monday before Thanksgiving. Amy Pascal is driving to her Sony Pictures office in Culver City, California. It's a day just like any other day for the Sony studio chief until she turns on her computer. And there on the screen is an image of a creepy red skeleton with a message, hacked by #GOP. Now, at first, Amy Pascal thinks this has got to be some kind of joke, but it wasn't a joke. It was the beginning of a cyber nightmare so bizarre that not even Hollywood screenwriters could have imagined it. Now, we know that the cyber attack was eventually attributed to the government of North Korea. It was one of the most damaging cyber attacks in American history, and it was perpetrated by one of the most isolated and poorest countries on earth. The attackers stole and then publicly released terabytes of data from Sony, including vital trade secrets, yet to be released movie scripts, salary and contract information, and personal information from thousands of Sony employees. But the attackers didn't just steal, they destroyed. They wiped data from hard drives of thousands of Sony computers and servers. The attack forced Sony off the grid entirely, and the attack revealed private emails so embarrassing that Amy Pascal, one of Hollywood's most powerful executives, eventually had to resign. And then it got worse. The attackers darkly warned of 9/11, and they vaguely threatened violence in movie theaters if Sony went ahead with its planned release of the movie The Interview, the comedy depicting the assassination of North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un. President Obama got involved. The FBI began to investigate. And in the end, the Sony hack wasn't just about Sony anymore. It was a national security incident, an international crisis, and a sneak preview at the future of cyber warfare. Now, just how serious are cyber threats to our nation as a whole, to our nation's economic vitality, to our national security? And how do leaders think about cyber threats in the context of other national security dangers that we confront in the United States? That's the story that I want to tell today. And the story starts by taking a look at the broader threat landscape that US foreign policy leaders have been confronting for the past several decades. This is a picture of the threat environment during the Cold War. It's a picture of a medium-range Soviet ballistic missile, an SS-4, as it's being paraded through Red Square in Moscow. This particular photograph is a Central Intelligence Agency reference photograph that was used during the Cold War. During the Cold War, foreign policy leaders knew that they faced the grave prospect of nuclear Armageddon, but they also knew that they faced a single principal adversary. They knew who that adversary was. They knew where that adversary was, and they had a pretty good idea of the Soviet Union's intentions and its capabilities. After all, the Soviets are parading their nuclear weapons through Red Square, and they're operating at a bureaucratic speed of 5
मैं
years.
सेशन में हूँ, बाद में बात करता हूँ.
This is a picture of the threat
मैं
environment.
सेशन में हूँ, मम्मी, बाद में बात करता हूँ.
It's more crowded and more uncertain and more complicated than any time in modern American history. It's filled with rising states, declining states, weak states, failed states, rogue states, non-state actors ranging from ISIS to anonymous, and transnational threats like global climate change. And the threat environment isn't just more crowded or complicated today, it's changing faster than ever before too. Every year, the Director of National Intelligence issues a public threat assessment where he runs down the list of dangers confronting the country. In 2007, not that long ago, that threat assessment did not put one word in it about cyber, not one. As late as 2009, cyber threats were so far down the list, they were right near the bottom, just after drug trafficking in West Africa. Not anymore. Cyber threats in the past few years have vaulted to the top of the threat list. And today, many experts and government officials are worried about 3 classes of cyber attacks or threats to our country. The first is the massive theft of intellectual property from American corporations that could degrade our economic competitiveness for generations. The second is attacks that could inflict massive disruption on our way of life in ways that we have never imagined before. And the third is cyber attacks that could degrade, disable, or destroy our nation's military ability to defend itself or to attack if our vital interests are threatened. The threat environment today is crowded, it's complicated, and it's uncertain, and it's changing at the speed of cyber. Cyber threats are a part of this threat environment, and they're new, but they're also very different from other traditional national security threats. And they're different in 5 key ways that I want to talk about with all of you. The first key difference between traditional national security threats and cyber threats is that the United States is simultaneously the most powerful country in cyberspace and the most vulnerable country in cyberspace. And that's different. In the military, we often talk about domains. The military talks about the air domain, the land domain, the sea domain. And in those physical domains, the countries that have the most weapons and the most sophisticated weapons are the most powerful. But that's not true in cyber. The United States has the most sophisticated offensive cyber capabilities of any nation in the world, and yet we in the United States are the most vulnerable. Why? Because we're the most connected. We rely on networks and connectivity for our economy, for our civil society, for our government, for our military, in tremendous and wide-ranging ways. Our connectivity is the source of our strength and the source of our weakness. The second major difference between traditional national security threats and cyber threats is that in cyberspace, the US government cannot go it alone, and this too is new. In every other security realm, the government is considered the legitimate monopoly provider of security. Now, what do I mean by that? If you think about how you want safe streets in your neighborhood, you pick up the phone, you call the police. The police, the government, legitimate monopoly provider of security for safe streets in your neighborhood. Well, the same thing is true if you want a safer country. If you want to secure your country from foreign attack, you strengthen your military, legitimate monopoly provider of security. But in cyberspace, it doesn't work that way. Because 85% of our nation's critical infrastructure is not owned by the US government, it's owned and operated by the private sector. Our power system, our telecommunications networks, our financial system, owned and operated by private actors. The government can't defend those sectors from attack by itself. The government can't go it alone. Now, the third key difference between traditional national security threats and cyber threats is that in cyberspace, the attack surface is huge. There are no safe neighborhoods in cyberspace. One senior military official described cyberspace to me this way. He said, imagine that there is a street in cyberspace that runs through the best parts of town and the worst parts of town, all at the same time. And on this street in cyberspace, people are doing the exact same things they're doing in the physical world. They're going shopping, they're going to their bank, they're watching movies, they're visiting friends. But there are also people on this street that are robbing banks, selling drugs, mugging people, committing all sorts of other crimes. Good guys, bad guys, they're all there together. They're all connected. There are no safe neighborhoods in cyberspace. Now, in part, this is because the internet was never designed to create safe neighborhoods in cyberspace. It was designed by a handful of researchers, including some right here at Stanford, to connect each other, a handful of people who knew each other, trusted each other, and wanted to share their work with each other. Only now, there aren't a handful of researchers on the internet. More than 40% of the world is on the internet, and internet traffic is expected to triple in the next 3 years alone. And then there's the growing Internet of Things. We are moving to a world where we are going to have appliances that are so smart, they turn themselves on when power rates are low, and they remind us to buy milk before we run out. We're moving to a world of driverless cars and implantable medical devices that can transmit vital data about our bodies directly to our doctors. The growing Internet of Things is incredible, but it comes with a dark side, and that dark side is called vulnerability, because anything that is smart is vulnerable. Now, technologists and computer scientists have a rule of thumb, and that rule of thumb is that when it comes to code, there is one defect for roughly every 2,500 lines of code. One defect for roughly every 2,500 lines of code. Think of it as a chain link fence, where every 2,500 links in that fence, there's a weak link or a missing link, right? One defect for every 2,500 lines of code. And think about the cyber bad guys that are out there. They're like the velociraptors in the movie Jurassic Park. Anyone remember them? Always trying to get out of the fence. So the cyber bad guys are out there, and they're spending every minute of every day testing the fence, penetrating the fence, looking for that one in every 2,500 links that might be weak or missing so they can get through. Okay? Now consider this. If you have an Android phone, that phone has 12 million lines of code making it do all those great things. That's nearly 5,000 inherent vulnerabilities in the code. Not malicious vulnerabilities, just mistakes or oversights or weaknesses that are inherent in the code that the coder never thought about. If you have a Windows operating system on your computer, that's 40 million lines of code. The attack surface in cyberspace is huge. That leads to the fourth difference, which is that in cyberspace, victims often don't even know that they're victims until sometimes long after the fact. The Home Depot breach that made headlines in 2014 wasn't discovered until 5 months after it began. One study found that 85% of cyber breaches were discovered weeks after they occurred, and more than 90% of them were discovered by third parties, not the victims themselves. The military is not immune from this challenge either. The worst publicly revealed breach in US military history occurred in 2008, when an infected thumb drive was placed inside a device inside a US military installation in the Middle East. A foreign intelligence service had put on that infected thumb drive something called a worm. And that worm spread malicious code, from computer to computer, and eventually accessed classified and unclassified networks. And that malicious code also directly sent that information directly to a server under foreign government control. And all of this was going on for 14 months before it was detected by the Pentagon. 14 months. This was a wake-up call for the Department of Defense. Victims often don't know they're victims until long after the fact. And that leads to the fifth and final difference between traditional national security threats and cyber threats. And that difference has to do with warning time before an attack and response time after an attack. Now, throughout history and warfare, there's usually been a long lead time for potential warning before an attack occurs. And this is because moving people and equipment across territory takes time. It takes effort. And that means there are often telltale signs that an adversary might be up to no good, like massing troops along the border. Once an attack occurs, however, response can be swift, because in the physical world, of course, we usually know who attacked us, and we know where they are. So long warning time before an attack, short response time after an attack. In cyber, it's flipped. No warning time before an attack, but response is hard, and sometimes it takes a long time. Why? Because of attribution. Attribution, or figuring out who's actually responsible for a cyber attack, is sometimes fast, but usually it's not. Because even if you know the computer or the server where the attack originated, figuring out who's typing behind that keyboard, what's their relationship to a company or an organization or a foreign government, is much, much harder. So these timing differences have pretty significant implications for how we think about defense and deterrence in a cyber age. And we're just beginning to figure that out. Now, how does the real cyber movie end? I don't know. But the Nobel laureate Tom Schelling once warned we should be very careful about confusing the unfamiliar with the improbable. The Sony attack was bizarre, but for most of us, it wasn't particularly scary. For most of us, we think about cyber threats of today like this. The cyber threats of today are about our information. It's about people who steal our credit cards. It's about making access to our computers and our smartphones harder. It's about remembering how to remember those passwords now. The cyber threats of today are annoying. They're not alarming. But the cyber threats of tomorrow won't just make our information unsafe. They could make our physical world unsafe too. The cyber threats of tomorrow could disable the cars that we drive, the airplanes that we fly. They could turn off power or water to cities across the country for days or weeks or longer. They could incapacitate our military or even turn our own weapons against us. The cyber threats of tomorrow could affect anything that requires a networked computer to operate. And increasingly, that means everything. Thank you very much.
I hope you people watched it very carefully, attentively, to have more sense, because in discussion that's very much needed. May I know one request in between? Do you have the next session or it's free? I'm just asking because if we are going to overshoot by 5-7 minutes, then it's okay or not? Shwetaji? Satyam? We have entrepreneurship. Okay, no issue. So should we go for the next video? Or you people in a position to recall it? May I know your response? Should we go through the next video? That's a cyber warfare, Stuxnet. Should we go? Okay.
2 years ago, a computer virus called Stuxnet infected and damaged the Iranian nuclear program. And that may sound like a good thing, but we are now learning this type of cyber attack could also be used against us. Last night on 60 Minutes, correspondent Steve Croft reported on this new cyber warfare battle.
Few people know more about the dark military art of cyber war than retired General Michael Hayden. He's a former head of the National Security Agency and was CIA director under George W. Bush. He knows a lot more about the attack on Iran than he can say here.
This was a good idea, all right? But I also admit this was a really big idea too. The rest of the world is looking at this and saying, clearly someone has legitimated this kind of activity as acceptable international conduct. The whole world is watching.
The story of what we know about the Stuxnet virus begins in June of 2010, when it was first detected and isolated by a tiny company in Belarus after one of its clients in Iran complained about a software glitch. Within a month, a copy of the computer bug was being analyzed within a tight-knit community of computer security experts, and it immediately grabbed the attention of Liam Omerku, an operations manager for Symantec, one of the largest antivirus companies in the world.
As soon as we saw it, we knew it was something completely different.
Steve Croft joins us now. Welcome.
Charlie, good to be here.
Good report. Can you summarize in a simple way how they were able to do this and have that impact on those centrifuges in Iran?
Well, somebody created a virus that was designed to hit one specific target in the entire world, something that had a bunch of a certain configuration of equipment that the computer or the virus was able to determine if it was the right target. This is what it was looking for.
Yeah.
It's one of the most ubiquitous pieces of machinery in the world. It's called a programmable logic computer, and it's just a piece of plastic with some chips in it, and it controls factory floors all over the world. This will tell you what chemicals and what amounts to put into a product that you're making. It'll tell you when to heat up the plant or cool it down. Could be used, for example, to shut off a cooling system at a nuclear reactor. And it was really the first virus to attack this little piece of equipment. And it was after a certain kind of Siemens equipment.
And by doing that, they were able to affect the centrifuges in Iran at a particular place.
Right. What it did was it essentially, the virus this sits in between the operators of the plant and the machinery on the floor. And what the virus was able to do was able to get in here, rewrite the software, and tell the machines to do something entirely different without the operators of the plant knowing it.
You spoke in your piece, for people who didn't see it, with retired General Mike Hayden, who of course is also former head of the NSA and the CIA director. There's a little bit more of your interview we didn't see last night. We want to play right now.
Do you think it was an act of war?
I would not call it an act of war. Look, given my own background, Steve, I mean, I've got this whole universe of things between peace and war that are called covert actions. I don't think whoever did this considered it to be an act of war. The Iranians have not quite responded to it as if it were an act of war. It's in that space between the two.
If the United States were involved in this or were to become involved in something like this,
Right.
How high would the authorization have to go?
You're asking a theoretical question.
Right.
I'm going to give you a theoretical answer based upon my experience in government. Something of this nature gets approved in the West Wing.
General Hayden said a lot of things in which he made space between the fact when he was in government making policy and where he is now.
Yes.
But he knows a lot of stuff.
He knows a lot of stuff, and he knows a lot of stuff that he can't say. And he was president or director of the CIA for George Bush at a time this would have been greenlighted.
What do they fear the most?
Well, I think that they fear somebody using something like this against us. And the thing that's really interesting about it is that this virus, as General Hayden said, it's not like a conventional weapon that destroys itself along with the target. It's out there for people to copy. So you can actually go online and find the formula for making this, the code.
It's the footprints that Cesar, I think you referred
Yes.
to it, or someone in the report did last night. It really is a Pandora's box that now has been opened.
Right. And somebody else could turn around and modify it and use it against us if they can find the way into our computer system.
Go ahead.
Is there any indication that that's being done, or that anything specifically being built on Stuxnet right now?
Well, there's now another virus sort of moving around the world called Dooku that a lot of people think was built by the same people, or it's or have used the code of Stuxnet that is also targeting PLCs. It seems right now to be extracting information from the PLCs so that it could be used in another Stuxnet type attack. But this is really an historic thing. I mean, it's going to be a component of war from now on. This was an historic event. And it can be used to disrupt all sorts of things.
The conventional wisdom or the perceived wisdom is that this might have been done by the Israelis, but they could not have done it without U.S. help.
I don't think so. I think that everybody feels that it was mostly a U.S. operation, everybody that we have talked to.
A U.S. operation.
U.S. operation, but obviously there was a lot of intelligence that was picked up on the ground. Somebody knew how this plan operated. And certainly I think the Israelis have proved that they have a bunch of people on the ground there.
Indeed. Thank you, Steve.
Now, shall we move towards the case? I hope these two videos makes a lot of sense in understanding what exactly the case is about and the seriousness required in cyber space. So this is the first question. Yes, try to attempt it. Yes. Any one of you? Very clearly mentions in the first video. She mentioned those three classic examples, the three areas: intellectual property theft, which degrade our economic competitiveness; attack that disrupt our way of life, such as attack to our infrastructure. I have shared one of example of, I think, Venezuela, where the power grid, the computer operated fully automated power grid completely collapsed by cyber attack, and that too not for a few hours. Entire country in lockdown, not a lockdown, blackout for almost 2 weeks. लोगों ने पूरे जो कहना चाहिए आइसक्रीम वगैरह थे, फ्रूट्स थे, वो सारे रोड पे फेंक दिए, सड़ गई चीजें, लोगों को खाने को नहीं। आप इमेजिन करिए। Then the attack that threatened the military ability to defend itself. कई बार तो आपके ही वेपन आपके ही अगेंस्ट यूज करने की भी कंडीशन बन जाती है। वेपन्स जो हैं वो आपके ही अगेंस्ट को यूज कर दें। Five differences between the cyber warfare and traditional, again in the first video very clearly mentioned. कुछ 5 में से कुछ 5 अगर याद ना भी हो तो एक या दो। सत्यम, नीलदीप, निश्चित, रमेश, किसी को भी याद हो? अब लोग शांतनु नाम के ही उसमें छोड़ दिए। कोई ऐसा डरने घबराने का नहीं है, नहीं है याद, कोई बात नहीं। श्रद्धा जी, आवाज तो आ रही है मेरी? नहीं आ रही है? ईशा जी, ओके, चलिए आवाज आ रही है। आवाज आ रही होगी तो शायद ये भी आवाज में आ रहा होगा कि मैं कोई क्वेश्चन पूछ रहा हूँ। किसी और को पता है तो ये मत सोचिए सर ने मेरा नाम तो लिया नहीं है। मैं नाम तो एट रैंडम बस ऐसे ही ले रहा हूँ। उस लेडी ने इतने लंबे वीडियो में बहुत डिटेल में बताया कि क्या डिफरेंसेस हैं। अटैक स्पेस सेम रहता है कि डिफरेंट रहता है ट्रेडिशनल वॉर में और साइबर वॉर में? जो इम्पैक्ट रहेगा स्पेस पर अटैक का वो सेम रहता है या डिफरेंट रहता है? ठीक है तेजस, मैं और फॉर्म में बोलूँ, सपोज पाकिस्तान इंडिया पर कहीं अटैक करता है तो पूरे कंट्री एक एक सिटी में अटैक होता है या स्पेसिफिक पोर्शन पे होता है, एरिया? कोई अनम्यूट करके बात करेगा तो बड़ा अच्छा लगेगा बेटा। मैं आपसे अनम्यूट करके बात कर रहा हूँ, मैं टाइप तो नहीं कर रहा हूँ। चलिए श्वेता जी से ही रिक्वेस्ट करते हैं। मिश्रा जी, आई होप मैं मिश्रा जी बोलता हूँ तो आपको बुरा तो नहीं लगता होगा, आदर से ही बोला जाता है ऐसा। यस श्वेता, श्वेता अनम्यूट कर पाएंगे क्या? ओके, नो इशू। प्रमेश, प्रमेश।
यस सर, यस सर।
हाँ बेटा, सेम रहता है या पाकिस्तान पूरी हर एक गली मोहल्ले में अटैक करेगा या स्पेसिफिक लोकेशन पर?
स्पेसिफिक लोकेशन पर।
और साइबर अटैक में क्या हो सकता है पॉसिबिलिटी, स्पेसिफिक लोकेशन की चाहे तो पूरे इंडिया?
पूरा इंडिया चाहे
तो साइबर वॉरफेयर में एक डिफरेंस तो क्लियर हुआ कि
यस
अटैक
सर,
सरफेस इज वेरी ह्यूज।
यस।
ठीक है, साइबर अगर ट्रेडिशनल वॉर हो रहा है तो शायद आपको पता भी रहे, जैसे हमको पता है कि भाई इंडिया और चाइना से हमको दिक्कत है, हमारी नेबरिंग कंट्री है, इससे दिक्कतें हैं, थोड़ा बहुत बांग्लादेश भी आप कह सकते हैं थोड़ा बहुत। बट साइबर अटैक में आप बता सकते हैं कि किसको आपको किससे आपको प्रॉब्लम है? डिफिकल्ट टू से, एम आई राइट? एंड विच पार्ट ऑफ द कंट्री दैट guy कैन डू और डैमेज nobody knows. Are you getting my point?
यस सर।
और पाकिस्तान अटैक करेगा तो हमको पता चल जाएगा ना कि अटैक हुआ है और किस लेवल का हुआ है। फर्स्ट वीडियो में ही उन्होंने बोला कि पेंटागन को 14 महीने बाद पता चला कि उनके यहाँ साइबर अटैक हुआ है। 14 महीने बाद आपको पता ही नहीं चलता है कि आपको अटैक हुआ है आप पर। डिफरेंसेस समझ में आ रहे हैं? मैं बिल्कुल आसानी से समझाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ। 5 डिफरेंसेस, मोर पावरफुल, मोस्ट वनरेबल। पहली तो चीज ये, इंडिया भी इसी कैटेगरी में आ रहा है। किस फॉर्म में? डिजिटल नेटवर्किंग और इंटरनेट कनेक्टिविटी के फॉर्म में, क्योंकि हमारे पास इंटरनेट यूजर्स बहुत ज्यादा हो गए। हर एक व्यक्ति के पास मोबाइल है, दैट टू विथ नेट कनेक्टिविटी, स्पेशली जियो के बाद। जितने आप नेट पर हैं, देयर आर अ चांसेस यू आर मोर वनरेबल। वनरेबिलिटी हम ऑलरेडी बात कर ही चुके हैं। गवर्नमेंट कैन नॉट गो इट अलोन। जब फिजिकल या ट्रेडिशनल वार होते हैं तो हमारी होल सोल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी हम किस पे छोड़ देते हैं? इट्स अ गवर्नमेंट जॉब टू प्रोटेक्ट द नेशन। बट इसमें क्या गवर्नमेंट अकेले कर सकती है? नहीं, everyone those who are part of it, they all need to play a good role in safety or security of data breach and all. Attack surface already discussed. Victim often don't know they are victim, that I also discussed. पेंटागन बोला और भी बोला, पता ही नहीं चलता। कई दिन बाद जब आप किसी चीज को एनकाउंटर करेंगे या देखेंगे तब पता चलेगा कि कुछ डैमेज हुआ है। वार्निंग्स एंड डिसीजंस, इसमें तो एज सच कोई वार्निंग मैसेजेस नहीं होते। पाकिस्तान ने पुलवामा किया, पाकिस्तान को पता था इंडिया कुछ करेगा, वो बहुत कुछ कर रहे थे, हमने कुछ ऐसा किया जो उनकी सोच के परे था, ये बात अलग है। अदरवाइज उनको ये पता था कि कुछ ना कुछ तो होगा, बट साइबर वॉर में कोई वार्निंग नहीं आता। फर्स्ट वीडियो में उन्होंने बताया कि सोनी पिक्चर्स नेक्स्ट डे व्हेन दे ओपन देयर वेब पेज और वेबसाइट, everything was vanished. Then they realized something has happened. No warning at all. भारत चाइना के साथ चल रहा था, लंबा चला प्रोसेस, सबको पता रहा क्या हो रहा क्या नहीं हो रहा, सारी वार्निंग सब कुछ चलता रहा। ऐसा नहीं कि अचानक से झटके में हो गया और आपको पता ही नहीं चला। I hope things makes clarity here. Why is the Stuxnet even considered to be historic? That again explained in the video. Why? Anyone? मौन व्रत को तोड़िए भाई लोग, बहन जी लोग, हम लोग क्या बहन जी बोलते हैं, सेंट्रल पार्ट ऑफ इंडिया, गुजरात में बोलेंगे एक तो बहन। मौन व्रत तोड़िए, बोलिए कुछ। ईशा, ईशा जी, आप गलत होंगे, गलत से ज्यादा और कुछ नहीं होगा। ये भी बहुत अच्छे से मेंशन था उसमें कि क्यों हिस्टोरिक, क्योंकि दैट वाज द फर्स्ट टाइम many people not involved into in this case. Many people got involved into in this case. तो इसलिए चुप हो गए हैं क्या? नहीं, ये आपको बोल रहे हैं बहुत से लोग इन्वॉल्व। नो नो नो, ये फर्स्ट टाइम था कि किसी कंट्री ने किसी कंट्री के अगेंस्ट एक एज अ स्ट्रेटेजिक मूव प्ले किया था। इट्स अ फर्स्ट टाइम दैट टू रिकॉग्नाइज्ड मैनर। हिडन फॉर्म में तो लोग करते ही रहे हैं, तो वो स्पाइंग का तो मैं नहीं बोल रहा हूं, बट एक वेल एस्टैब्लिश्ड मैनर की मैं बात कर रहा हूं। दैट्स अ डॉक्यूमेंटेड एफर्ट टू यूज कंप्यूटर मालवेयर टू डिस्ट्रक्ट एंड हार्म अनदर नेशन। किससे? न्यूक्लियर पावर बनने से। ठीक है, जो पीएलसी को उन्होंने यूज किया, दैट वाज द फर्स्ट इंसिडेंस, यू कैन से डॉक्यूमेंटेड एफर्ट। स्पाइंग के फॉर्म में, हिडन फॉर्म में चल रहे होंगे, उसको मैं नहीं कह रहा हूं। What is a danger that the creator of Stuxnet have created for other industrial countries? अब इसमें चाइना भी आ जाता है, इंडिया भी आ जाता है, यूनाइटेड स्टेट भी आ जाता है। जो मैं आपको मेंशन भी कर रहा था मॉर्निंग सेशन में कि इंडिया का चंद्रयान 2 जो मिशन था उसमें पार्शियली कुछ ऑब्जेक्टिव्स अचीव नहीं हो पाए, तो उनके पीछे भी कुछ कुछ कंस्पिरेसी ऐसा है कि है, कोई डॉक्यूमेंटेड प्रूफ अभी नहीं है। The problem is that the code is itself can be copied, changed, replicated or launched against the PLC. जैसे आपने रोबोट मूवी देखी हो, अगर रोबोट देखा है रजनीकांत ऐश्वर्या राय का, नहीं देखा है तो भी कोई बोल सकता है। देखो ईशा ने बोला कि देखा है, आपने नहीं देखा, तो इतना तो पता है कि आपने नहीं देखा है। नहीं देखा है तो नहीं बोल दीजिए कि सर नहीं देखा है। अब देखा है तो मेरे को बिलीव आएगा। आफ्टर अ टाइम क्या हो जाता है, जो रोबोट एक पॉजिटिव नोट के लिए बनाया गया था, उसकी प्रोग्रामिंग को चेंज करके वही डिस्ट्रक्टिव हो जाता है, सेम रोबोट। ठीक है, सो दिस इज ऑल्सो पॉसिबल, हाउ यू कैन प्रोटेक्ट इट। व्हाई आर पीपल और एजेंट नीडेड? क्यों जरूरत होती है, ये मैं डिस्कस किया हुआ हूं। अभी मॉर्निंग सेशन में ही मैंने थोड़ा सा डिस्कस किया हुआ था, जब हम बात कर रहे थे इंडिविजुअल एम्प्लॉय की। Because you need to install it, you need to fix it, you need to think, you need to check whether things are working in the expected manner. It's an unethical task, but for them it's their duty. So whether these unethical things are actually working or not. So people on the ground are useful. If anything is not working as per the expectations, so they can fix it then and there. So these agents required, and they support that unethical job exactly. Okay, ये लास्ट में अगर आपको याद हो तो उन्होंने बोला कि ये वन साइडेड था, एक्चुअली अदर साइड नहीं हुआ, तो इट्स नॉट अ एक्ट ऑफ वॉर, क्योंकि उन्होंने हॉस्टाइल फॉर्म में नहीं किया. अगर हम मैनेजमेंट की लैंग्वेज में बोलें तो दे प्लेड विद अनदर स्ट्रेटजी, so it's not called as an act of war. That is the one reason. Okay, तो इसके आंसर्स आपको बोले गए हैं, बट आप ना लिखें, चलेंगे, कोई बात नहीं, ड्यू टू अ टाइम कंस्ट्रेंट, बट गो थ्रू दोज रिकॉर्डिंग टू हैव अ मोर क्लैरिटी. बट जो यूनिट के आंसर्स हैं, जो भी क्वेश्चंस पूछे गए हैं, उनमें से एनी टू आप रिस्पॉन्ड जरूर करेंगे, ठीक है. और मैं अपलोड कर दूंगा, शेयर करूंगा अपने ग्रुप में. टू थिंग्स, वन इज गूगल फॉर्म एंड अनदर वन इज गूगल सीट. तो सीट में आप डिटेल डालेंगे, चेक करेंगे कि वो कंपनी ले ली गई है, वो पर्सन का ग्रुप बन गया है, फिर फिक्स करेंगे आप उसको किसमें, गूगल फॉर्म के थ्रू. तो फॉर्म का डिटेल जो रहेगा वो फिक्स माना जाएगा टाइम के साथ, ठीक है. यस यस यस, प्रोजेक्ट गाइडलाइंस, यस श्योर श्वेता, थैंक यू. ओके, मैं पहले ही बोला हूं कि ये बहुत ज्यादा मतलब हार्ड वर्क नहीं है. यू रिक्वायर्ड ऑलमोस्ट आवर. इफ यू आर इन अ ग्रुप, so 3 persons can do within an hour at a time. If you are a single individual, you may take 1 to 2 hours, not more than this. Clear? Any two question? Yes, of 4th, 5th assignment. And this case you need not to submit. Other case I hope you already submitted till 3rd module. 4th module में कोई case था ही नहीं. Okay. Thank you all. Now we will move to our revision from the next session. Few things of this module, then we will move to the revision. So please come prepare for the revision purpose. If you have any doubt, please discuss on the next sessions, coming sessions, whenever we have. Okay. Be ready. Whenever we will find a free time, I will engage the session, and I will request you people as well. Personally, you can inform me on WhatsApp which time in a timetable you are having free, because many subjects get over, so the faculty may not take it. So anyone voluntarily can take this responsibility to inform. If I am free or available that time, I will engage that lecture. Okay. Thank you. Be prepared in a next session with your own questions, your requirements, any helps which you require from me.